Good morning. Welcome to October 1 Grand Rounds. Welcome, Dr. Beanlitz. We're very happy this morning to, and on behalf of the team, I've been asked to introduce for you Dr. Peter Zilla, Professor Dr. Peter Zilla. And Peter, several of you will know, is a very highly reputable cardiac surgeon from South Africa, originally from Austria, and who's been the chief of the Cardiothoracic Christian Barnard Division of Cardiothoracic Surgery at the University of Cape Town for the last 25 odd years or so. And Peter had visited the Heart Institute here back in 2004. I'd been invited by Dr. Messana and was quite instrumental in helping yours truly's lab program, if you will, which since then has been taken on by much smarter people, Eric Saronin and Emeritus Alarcon, and very recently, Marcello Munoz as well, who was here. And I think the point of those grand rounds is really, you know, we can get education anywhere, in books, through colleagues, etc. I think the grand rounds are unique in two ways. They foster collaboration, and sometimes they do reset or perspective as well, right? And we're kind of for an hour, we hear about a completely different perspective, and I think we will today. Dr. Zilla came to help Marcello, who's trying to build a tissue engineered blood vessel, and has been very instrumental with this and gave us research rounds on Monday. But also Dr. Zilla, as you know, is a very seasoned surgeon who came from a German-Austrian training background, was very successful there, and fell in love, as per his own words, with South Africa, and has been there ever since. And basically found a way in a resource-limited environment to be innovative and provide amazing humanitarian impact. So when I think of Professor Zilla, I think of someone who displays innovation, but also great conscience. And I think that's a wonderful thing for us to hear. So as he was here for several days, we thought of having him provide perspective on providing cardiovascular care and perhaps more specifically cardiac surgery care in Africa in a resource-constrained environment. So Peter, we're so happy you're here. It's been a delight to interact with you over the last few days, and thank you for accepting our invitation. And I want to thank also everybody who did the great work to get Professor Zilla in, and I'm thinking of Alison Conley, our research services team, and really the support of Professor Rayner, Alarcon, and Saronin to make this feasible. Thank you very much. Lastly, I do want to highlight that we have the High Commissioner of South Africa here. And sir, I will read your name, Mr. Tladi and Mr. Munya as well, who are both here as High Commissioners of South Africa to hear Professor Zilla's presentation. So we're very honored, and thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Mark, for this kind invitation, for your kind introduction to all of you who invited me. It was a whirlwind 2.5 days of amazing impressions. The meeting with the scientists on Monday was really extremely impressive. All these enthusiastic young people, and they all ask the right questions, and they have their heart in the right place to really complement the fantastic clinical work you do here. And of course, I'm still awed from having been in the OR yesterday with Mark. You really have a very special surgeon here with him. And what impressed me most was, apart from watching a robotic case, to observing the atmosphere in his OR. And I think we can all learn from that. For me, it's a little bit too late, but for young surgeons, I can just encourage you to get a feeling for the atmosphere in his operating theater. So what I'm going to tell you today has not much to do with this utopic, fantastic, cutting-edge surgery you performed yesterday. It's a different world. I have been living in a middle-income country like South Africa now for 35 years. And after that time, the professional reality of a middle-income country becomes for yourself the first reality. So I still can compare things with how they were in Europe. I still have my friends and colleagues in North America and in Europe. But in my heart, I'm a South African now, and I have learned to live with the circumstances. And you will see, even if the circumstances don't apply for you here, to open that window may not be a bad idea, because we are talking about 3/4 of mankind. So we, if I briefly change my hat back to a European, we live a little bit in a bubble of 1/4 of mankind, and 3/4 live in low to middle income countries. And I thought I quickly start with 2 very brief videos which can tune you to what I'm going to talk about. I hope we have sorted out the sound. For the cardiac surgeons amongst you, you at least know that Sir Magdi Yaqub is really our big hero of our era, and he is the one who really dedicated his life to rheumatic heart disease.
Rheumatic heart disease kills, and it kills the young, less dramatically than something like measles, which kills a child relatively quickly. This is a long and rather unpleasant disability.
Rheumatic heart disease has virtually disappeared from the developed world. However, it remains a massive problem in the developing world, with many people, millions, being affected by this disease.
I've put my hand around the upper arm of teenage boys. The ravages are just hard to imagine when you see these young children, and it's why it's such a compelling disease. And it is, again, something that the developed world just doesn't see. It's not like my friend had this. This is a problem of this rural community, of all of Africa.
So rheumatic heart disease is a complex disease. Put simply, it starts off as a sore throat in childhood caused by a bacterium called a streptococcus. Now, a very small proportion of people with this type of sore throat go on to develop a condition called rheumatic fever. And this is a disease that affects many parts of the body, but the important effects are on the heart, and particularly the heart valves, where it causes chronic inflammation and scarring, and this leads to the problems of heart disease some years later.
And also, based on this daily experience, we used the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the first heart transplant, which had happened in Cape Town in 1967 globally. And the celebration in 2017 was a big event. And we utilized that event to bring all big cardiothoracic societies globally together under one umbrella, which we call the Cardiac Surgery Inter-Society Alliance. And their single objective is to help establish local capacity, because all of you have met one or the other who went on a mission flying for $5 million, a team for a week to Africa, operate 5 children, come back, and the 5 children have problems with the follow-up, and they didn't leave knowledge behind. So our goal is to establish knowledge, local knowledge, to treat the patients. And just briefly to the CSIA.
The Cardiac Surgery Inter-Society Alliance believes that where you live should not determine whether you live. Cardiologist Nusa Jessen reunites with her first rheumatic heart disease surgical patient.
Our staff is performing every day little and big miracles.
Tive momentos tão difíceis na vida que muitos nem esperavam que eu chegasse até então. Depois da cirurgia, eu não me sinto.
She was 18 years old, she was so thin, and she was so weak she couldn't even get out of the bed.
I think that's where you really see what you've done, is when you meet the family of that patient and having a loved one back again.
CSIA was founded by Professor Peter Zilla and evolved from the Cape Town Declaration, which was a clarion call to our societies to address the disparity in access to cardiac care.
When I was young, I dreamed about treating the heart.
With the support of the government, CSIA launched a pilot mentorship program in Mozambique.
The unique thing about CSIA is it's not just an NGO that comes into a hospital and does surgery and leaves.
Our goal is to foster sustainable development through a mentor-mentee program. We do that by pairing an experienced team from a middle to high-income country with an established team from a low-income country.
Where we can help with consumables we build.
They see similar resource constraints, a similar pathology, similar administrative challenges, and supply chain issues. We work with the governments, the infrastructure, the Ministry of Health, all helping to empower the local team to achieve full independence.
So can we just start off by confirming how many cases we plan for next week?
Tim and his colleagues represent the Cape Town mentors, working very closely with mentee Adriano and team in Maputo.
So the combination of us giving advice beforehand, getting them prepped for it, and then supporting them through it is what makes it work.
When he came here for the first time, we didn't know each other. When I start operating, he said, "But you do the things the same way I do."
The echo, of course. Yeah, the echo is there.
Bruno Pedesser and I have joined the CSIA mentors from Cape Town. We're here to endorse the newly donated 3D echo machine, see it in action, and collaborate to provide surgical advice as needed.
We don't want the fly-in mission. However, when we want to transfer a new technology, you sometimes have to break rules.
He was so kind with me, telling me what to do. I gave everything. I am very thankful, and I will never forget today.
Os médicos fizeram o milagre e Deus operou. Obrigada.
Thank you, CSI.
CSIA is a call to arms, strengthened by the power of every major cardiothoracic surgical society worldwide.
So what is great about it is that all societies are behind it. Any publication which comes out is going to be every time simultaneously published in the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular, in the Annals, in the Asian, in the European. And the next call is going out now. And I was pleasantly surprised to see our dear cardiology colleague from Zimbabwe being here unexpectedly for me today, because they are one of the candidates for the second round. But having given you that little bit of an introduction to our enemy on the pathology side, I want to show you the face of the enemy. This is how the valves look, and I doubt that many of the valves you operate on ever look like that. This is, of course, primarily affecting the mitral valve, primarily mixed mitral valve disease. So repair is possible, but in a very limited number of cases with an Indian approach of peeling off the scar tissue. And so in the end, you need a lot of replacements. And what is also important here to mention, if you look on the left side, this is the development of rheumatic heart disease. So yes, if people say it is a disease of yesterday, it applies to you. If you look at the course over the years, particularly South Asia being number one in maintaining numbers, and Sub-Saharan Africa number two. But please look to the right side. Cardiac surgery was developed because of the pressure of rheumatic heart disease in North America and in Europe. And if you look at the numbers, and also the headline is quite frightening because nobody talks about it. Rheumatic heart disease affects more people than HIV. But since HIV also affects the first world, people talk about it. Rheumatic heart disease goes completely under the radar screen. And if you look at what happened after the war in North America, if today's numbers are, let's say, 11 to 13 cases per million needing operations, in 1940, the US had 40 patients needing surgery for rheumatic heart disease. By 58, it was only 12. By now, it's hardly zero, except for a couple of migrants. So what I want to do in this next half hour is to give you sort of three headlines. The one is, and we touched on that already, the pathology. The other one is access to surgery. But the third one is also, and this is where I feel very strongly, the unsuitability of our first world products for these patients. And before going into any further details, this graph is crucial for everything because this is, it reflects the epidemiological transition. If you move from left to right, blue is our typical Western degenerative disease, red is rheumatic heart disease, and kids are everywhere in the world, 10%, we know that. So as a country gets richer and moves from left to right, rheumatic heart disease, red, is replaced by degenerative disease, blue. There's no doubt, in total numbers, blue outweighs red. But the bluer it gets, the more there are the means to do something about it. And if you look at the circles indicate how many percent of the population affected get surgery. And this is the sombering part. So on the one hand, you can say, well, there are absolutely fewer patients because we estimate in a sub-Saharan African country, you need about 350 open hearts per million. You have 1,200 open hearts per million. So many more, but the patients get it. If you look at a country like China, it's a wonderful example. And these numbers are 7 years old now. So you have to slightly flatten the curve. But you see what's happening there. You have in the densely populated, urbanized areas, you have heart centers like nowhere in the world. These are those few. You can count them on a hand. Fuwei in Beijing, Anzin in Beijing, Shanghai. A few centers, but Fuwei is doing 15,000 open hearts a year, 15,000 a year. The vast majority is doing less than 100. So you know that in the less densely populated area, where at the moment still 40% of the Chinese population sit non-urbanized, they depend, even in the most advanced middle income country, they depend on very small centers with very small numbers. One of the first things we did with CSIA was each of those countries you see here went to really government sources and said, let us establish what is each country really providing with regards to needs. So the needs assessed first, and then how many surgeons do we have? How many operations are we doing? And if you look at that, India and China, are in the quarter region. So those two are at the level where every fourth patient in need of cardiac surgery gets it. If you look to Africa, it looks dismal. If you look to Mozambique alone, every 100th patient in need of heart surgery gets it. South Africa is a particularly sad story because if you look at the overall number, it's 32%. But 100% of those patients who have a private medical aid, the haves, they get 100% of the number of cardiac operations any European is getting. In the vast majority of indigent patients, 7% get open heart surgery and 93% don't. So this is all something which you need to address when you want to look at these problems. The ones in China are very different from the ones in South Africa. And finally, the valves themselves. And this is also one of the big puzzles. All these valves, and I showed that slide on Monday already, were developed in the course of 2 or 3 years and were brought into the first patients in the course of 2 and 3 years. Nina Brown valve already developed a polymer valve. The material wasn't ready then, but first implants all between March 1960 and August 1960. And in my own bias, I'm always proud to mention that the very first implant of a heart valve was happening at the NIH and not in a private hospital. All of these patients had rheumatic heart disease. Each single one was operated at age 40 plus and had rheumatic heart disease. That was the driver while these valves were developed in a few years. And then something spectacular happened. It's probably the only product in the world where the results get better and better without doing a thing to the product itself. Because patients got older. So if I'm Medtronic or Edwards, what a lucky situation. You don't need to do anything to improve your valves. Patients improve consistently, they get older. And you know, if you put a tissue valve into a 70-year-old patient, it's very different from putting it into a 30-year-old patient. But this is the reality. And one of the big problems we are facing is that guidelines, northern guidelines, get applied because there are no own guidelines in the absence of proper stats and all that. So the guidelines say if you are younger than 60, you put a mechanical valve in, and older than 60, a tissue valve. If we follow those guidelines, this is, and unfortunately, most of us have to and do in the absence of alternatives, this is our daily life, or let me call it our nightly life. Those who make it with a clotted valve into the hospital at 2 in the morning onto the table are a minority, and lucky, and the others who got a tissue valve look like that. So if you look at the distribution and you say this is the cutoff line for so-called modern tissue valves, 60 plus, the majority of high-income countries lies solidly in this blue area. Everything is fine, and most of them have a valve which outlives their life expectancy. Below the 60s, you have still 24% of your population is younger than 60 and would also like to get a TAVI perhaps and can't, at least in ethical sound hands. If you go to middle and low income countries, the vast majority falls into this group. So guidelines say they need to get mechanical valves. Reality is many of them have no access to open heart surgery or catastrophic results. What I did last year, we looked into just INR results, 21,000 INRs over 10 years in patients who had received an aortic valve, a mechanical aortic valve. And a quarter was in the range, 3/4 were seriously out. And if you break it down, what happens is this is the number of tests which patients perform, and we understand the obstacles. The next place where they can get their INR tested is 50 kilometers away, and they often can't afford the bus ticket. So they end up, after 6, 7 years, having one test a year. They think we have survived 8 years now. Why would we need to have more tests? And the result is this and this, where you have a very narrow group properly treated. Consequences, we looked about 6, 7 years ago, we looked into the long-term survival just of one group of rheumatic aortic valves. 10% of our patients were dead after 10 years, were seriously handicapped by strokes. And if you look around, in a New Zealand Maori study, almost a third needed redo surgery after 10 years. And this goes on and on. Wherever you come across the very few studies, they all show the same bleak pictures. If you look at double valves, and this is also a hallmark of rheumatic heart disease, these patients are even younger, whereas the single valves are between 42 and 43 in average now. 30 years ago, the average age for rheumatic patients at surgery was 27. So there's also something changing to the disease itself, but they are now 36. So they are going to be younger and younger. So I make the slightly provocative statement, which still reflects the reality. First world heart valves didn't move, and they are simply not good enough for 5/6 of mankind. So what we need soft leaflet valves without anticoagulation, and they need to be long-lasting. And we had fierce discussions in the 90s, and some of you may remember Fred Schoen as the leading pathologist in the field. And he insisted there is no immune response involved. We insisted there is. And if that is the case, you have only two options. You can either mask better than our valves do, or you can remove it, immunogenicity. And we did a very simple killer experiment here. We immunized rabbits with tissue valve homogenates, and then used their antibodies to compare calcification after we soaked the valves in these antibodies. And calcification was 3.5 times higher with the antibodies. So this is clear. And there are many options to do it, but the best is to do both. So we worked a lot on decellularization. We worked a lot on different cross-linkings. That was 90s, early 2000s. And you can see, if you combine the two, you can really, this is the normal calcification level of a conventional tissue valve. You can knock out calcification as good as down to 2 or 3%. But of course, the real non-immunogenic material is polymer. And with polymers, everyone immediately, and this is also so amazing, we were also talking on Monday, on the one hand, so much information can be found in literature of the 60s and 70s, but on the other hand, nobody reads it. But when it comes to things like that, everyone will immediately tell you, yep, but Nina Braunwald in 58 tried a polymer valve and it heavily calcified and it didn't work. Well, we have, fortunately, on the material side, we have very, very different materials today. And you can see, oops, when you put in an old material, it degrades, it cracks, it calcifies, but actually modern materials don't. And then we come to the issue of access. And again, if you go back in literature, and I belong to an age group where I even used this in a couple of patients at the beginning of my career in South Africa. This was the scourge of mitral stenosis. That was the predominant version of rheumatic heart disease. And it was general surgeons at the forefront, which inserted the Stubbs dilator transapically and cracked it. And they saved tens of thousands of patients in the absence of cardiac surgery. General surgeons. They had no fear to push something through the apex. There are other fears, as you will see later. So we had the crazy idea 15 years ago to say, look, if it worked 40 years ago and 50 years ago, that in the absence of cardiac surgery, you find a general surgeon who can do that, why not design a sort of TAVI equivalent, which is easy to place, but it addresses the specifics of the needs. What are the specifics of the needs? As you see on the left side, your patients, 70 to 80 in average, 350,000 globally, TAVIs and open heart surgery replacements for aortic valve. On the right side, estimated 1.5 million per year would need an aortic valve. Access must be easier, and regurgitation. Rheumatic aortic valve disease is regurgitant, not stenotic. So you have as an additional challenge for the TAVR that there is no calcium. And you must avoid anticoagulation. And therefore also leaflet longevity. And there's more. And that is the physiology of contraction. Your, if I may call them, your hearts have a hypertrophied myocardium, small ventricular volume, strong, and the only problem is get the plug out here. Our hearts, if I can again call them, our hearts are the typical huge hyperdynamic AR hearts. They are not forgiving for rapid pacing, and hyperdynamic movement, if you can't pace, needs to be fixed and held. Well, in all that, you would say you are doomed. You're in Africa, just give up and wait that at one day there will be needs in the Western world and it will trickle down. And we were extremely lucky 15 years ago to find a local South African funder who really funded a program which we could properly begin. That means we have between 60 and 70 engineers now, which worked for 14 years with us. We have an infrastructure all embedded in the university, which doesn't need to shy away from our colleagues in Switzerland, for instance. And it has a precedent because in the 70s, after Chris Barnard did his first open heart, his first transplant, the South African mining industry donated a 9-story building to his research. And as that had faded out over the years, we had that to build on. And the result is first of all, solution for our deployment. As we said, transapical, don't compare it with your situation. Don't frown and say transapical. We all are long in the transfemoral field. It's different. And if you don't want to pace fast, you need a hollow balloon. So we thought we'd just buy a hollow balloon because the world is full of balloons. There were no hollow balloons. So a lot of our development went into being able to develop a balloon which doesn't occlude the circulation when you put it in. The other thing is, of course, these are not TAVI surgeons, so you need to give them something which is not traumatic on retrieval. And last not least, the big decision was self-expanding, nitinol. We all know that we do have still a higher rate of permanent pacemaker. You can't add to a procedure which should cost as little as possible, just a pacemaker for every 10th patient. That's number one. It is, once you have a self-homing deployment system, it is easier to put something short in. But last, not least, and most importantly, we need something which can sit there in the absence of calcium. And we had one brilliant engineering team which said it can be cobalt chromium. You just need to design it in a way that plastic deformation just lifts up arms as if it were nitinol. And a little bit a circle to our discussions on Monday with tissue ingrowth, and I come to that in a second to more detail, but all the skirts, all the sewing rings which you have ever seen are tissue growth onto it. But you need tissue growth into it in a patient group where you want to minimize bacterial endocarditis. And one more issue I mentioned in a second. So let me give you just a view of how this opens up. As we inflate the balloon, the valve really pushes out its side arms, gets its typical hourglass shape, and you cannot dislodge it anymore. And one of the other advantages was that, and this was still from Chris Barnard's day, we had everything under one roof and still have. So from the experimental operating theaters to the engineers, it's probably 20 meters to walk, and they were always present. So allow me one more 2-minute movie to just show you how simple the implantation itself is, that the claim to have something which can go onto the frontline holds.
A placement consists of 3 easy steps. Firstly, correct positioning using the self-locating balloon trunks. Secondly, valve implantation with a non-occlusive hollow balloon. And then lastly, retrieval of the system. We start off by advancing the TAVI system into the ascending aorta, and by using a reference pigtail catheter placed into one of the aortic valve cusps, we then confirm the position of the device in the ascending aorta by doing an aortic root injection. The self-locating balloon trunks are now exposed, followed by inflation, or as we refer to as growing of the balloon trunks. Once fully grown, gentle traction is applied until tactile feedback is provided, which confirms engagement of the balloon trunks in the aortic valve sinuses. If this is not achieved, this step is repeated by slightly advancing, then rotating the device a few degrees, and again gently applying traction. You will appreciate that correct positioning, even in the absence of any fluoroscopic calcium footprints, becomes a simplified and almost one-handed procedure. Now, once location is secured, the correct position is confirmed with another aortic root injection. We now fully expose the helical balloon and the TAVI valve by completely unsheathing the device. Once done, a final root injection again confirms position if needed, and the pigtail catheter can now be removed and the correct position be maintained by gentle traction on the device, which continuously provides tactile feedback. So the next step is to implant a new valve. Now, whilst the hollow balloon is being expanded, I would like to focus your attention that we do not need rapid ventricular pacing, and also that cardiac output is maintained throughout expansion of the hollow balloon. Following full expansion of the prosthesis, the trunks are collapsed by invaginating them, whereafter the hollow balloon is also deflated.
What's the dynamic?
The retrieval component consists of a pressurized rolling sheath that invaginates the entire hollow balloon before removal. Finally, we evaluate the function of the prosthesis, and as you can see, the aortic root injection shows optimal positioning and no paravalvular leak, which is also confirmed on echocardiography. And as we have also become accustomed to in the TAVI arena, there is virtually no gradient over the new prosthesis. So with that, we conclude our live in a box recording for this patient.
So if you just briefly look, where did we arrive after a relatively long time? And I don't want to use only COVID as an excuse, that this is in year 14. But we have started with patient recruitment at the beginning of the year for the decellularized bioprosthetic version, but we are quite far with the polymer 1. You can see we went through 3 generations with actually excellent long-term cheap implants. This is the last one, and this is without anticoagulation. This is very important. So we know we have a modern polymer that doesn't calcify. We've gone through very rigorous also subcutaneous rat implants, everything. The thrombogenicity is minimal, and all we need now is to make sure that they are safe, that you don't have even 1% failing. And the 3rd generation is now really tested with regards to quality control. You can see our test facilities are really extensive. And what differentiates this approach from another 3 or 4 programs with polymer valves is that instead of just dip coating, where you get a universal thickness, our spray approach allows differential thickness. So you do finite element modeling and you say, where do I need stronger leaflets? Where do I need less strong leaflets? And you can address that all. And also the quality control. So we believe that with 1 year delay now after the bioprosthetic ones, we will be ready for clinical studies. But if you look at the situation of the clinical studies, that opened a front line of problems I would have never experienced or expected. One of them was that there are sensitivities, particularly in South Africa, that vulnerable groups may be not protected, and a little bit of a delusional approach to say we have open heart surgery. We have far too little open heart surgery. But we had, just that you look at this number, we had already 22 referrals for patients on the one hand, and in the big centers in South Africa, each one was turned down for the trial with the argument we have open heart surgery. So we have expanded it now to countries which appreciate that they can expand surgery, as you can see in orange here, from Namibia to Zambia. With Zimbabwe, we are in the middle of talking. But these were delays which were sort of adding to another problem, and that was the regulatory authorities were used to just approve products which were already in a few thousand patients in North America or Europe. This is the first time that a regulator is challenged to say, is that safe or not, without any experience of a class 3 regulatory approval. And just a very brief overview, of course, new front lines can be opened up now. In the beginning, the whole world was just dabbling with the aortic valve as stage 1. The mitral valve is the real issue, of course, in rheumatics. We have already a very nice prototype on that side, which we are busy with the Leduc Foundation to fund. And the same applies, of course, to surgical polymer valve for these patients. And because they go into adolescence, they need to have incorporated the possibility of expansion. And that, of course, our stents are really ideal for that. And our valve design gives you at least a 10% diameter increase, which is 20%, and enough from an adolescent to an adult. And this last slide, once again, closes the circle to our discussions on the tissue engineering side on Monday. And that is that we can really bring this aspect in when it comes to the healing of our skirts and of our sewing rings, because those of you who have ever done a redo valve replacement, and I'm sure there are quite a few in this room, you know one thing: you can't peel it out. You need to cut after 30 years of implant. You need to cut every single stitch still. It holds it firmly in. In other words, whatever, for instance, Edwards claims now with expandable frames, they can't expand because they are sutured in. So if you have something where the tissue, the surrounding tissue, grows into the depth and not onto it, you have a good chance that you get away with resorbable sutures and eventually have a situation where you can expand the valve. So that brings me to just the end of my presentation. I'm grateful for your attention. I hope I've been able to highlight one particular aspect, and that is that in the Western world, the fact that our patients got older and less and less and less demanding made everyone a little bit complacent. And we have still the burning problems in at least 2/3 of mankind, which were the driver in the first place in North America to get cardiac surgery going. And if that complacency doesn't wake up, I think it is very likely that centers of innovation are slowly also moving away. Thank you for your attention.
Professor Zilla, that was great. Thank you very much for this very mind-opening perspective, and to share with us some of the challenges that you have in your resource-constrained environment, and some of the very innovative solutions that you've taken to overtake them. So we're very grateful. This is not a problem we hear about every day, and certainly the solutions are, I think all of us, it makes all of us think about, the privilege that we have, but also the extra impact that we could have by helping with the plight of, as you say, so much of mankind who are afflicted by these problems. So we have a couple of questions here. Perhaps I'll start with this from Dr. Quan Chan. Dr. Chan is a very famous cardiologist who recently retired, but we're happy to see that he is at rounds this morning. And Dr. Chan said, great talk. Would like to hear about the initiatives for prevention in Africa. Economic development appears to be the better approach, but which are your thoughts?
What is the better approach?
Initiatives in prevention in Africa.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, we can talk about any topic in medicine, and you always kill the treatment with the word prevention, absolutely. But I think we all are too deep in medicine not to know that the time frame where prevention can kick in is beyond the lifespan of each one of us. We were talking yesterday about atherosclerosis, how in the 80s, 800,000 coronaries were done every year because everyone smoked and no one had statins available. By now we have half that number, even if you add the stenting and everything, because of preventive means. From the medication side, statins made a big difference, non-smoking and exercise. But it was 40 years to get to the midpoint. And there's no doubt in another 40 years, not a single soul will not have realized that smoking kills your arteries more than your lungs and so on. But for that time frame, we need to be able to offer something. And there, all those who are already ill now, and rheumatic heart disease is a disease which develops over decades. You discover it in children already, and they may become symptomatic at age 40 or 50. They are already carrying the disease. And you must be able to offer a solution to those who are affected.
I'd like to ask you a question. We are, as you know, the Heart Institute is probably the flagship cardiovascular institution in the country. And Canada is really opening up to the world, even more so in the last few years because of Juris, I would say, right? And we certainly have to increase our perspective. So what can we do, Peter? What can we do as an institution to help with the problems of the third world, of sub-Saharan Africa? You nicely enunciated an example for, I think we're training a young cardiologist from Zimbabwe. A few years ago, we had a heart surgeon, Dr. Efobi, who came on an ATS grant, something called Every Heartbeat Matters.
Yes.
And Dr. Efobi, I still see at the ATS, very thankful, but sadly, they have not been able to start a cardiac surgery program in Nigeria. They're only doing thoracic surgery now, not yet open heart surgery, quote unquote. But what can we do? How can we help with this problem?
So I think CSIA is, for the first time, a beautiful platform because it's not single NGO activities. It's our professional societies which got together and said, we define very clearly what we want, local capacity. There, you have a whole variety of possibilities to help. For instance, Johns Hopkins is at the moment working on getting us an anesthetic machine for Mozambique. This is, of course, not the same as training. So the principle of CSI is to have a mentorship agreement between a high volume center which sees rheumatic cases and one of those. So even facilitating that, for instance, you still have high volume centers in Brazil, just to, Cape Town has linked up with Mozambique, but similar to that, to facilitate and being in a leading position, in a high-profile leading position, you may even be able to get those two sides together to say, but I know you guys are a leading center for that, and then help to say, what does it take that you become a mentor for that? Sending surgeons onto missions is always a little bit of a tricky one because it goes very quickly into the opposite, which we have been fighting for a long time, the missions. And still, as long as the principle is upheld, every time we went to Mozambique, none of us operated. All of us assisted the locals. We got then afterwards the locals to us. And then we said, what is missing? Okay, you need temporary pacemaker wires. And here's a box, take it with you, also a little bit in an unconventional way.
Dr. Zilla, wonderful presentation. I'm a scientist, not a clinician, so I can ask questions related to materials. So the materials that you are implementing in the valves, what's making a difference from 60 years ago that people has already tried silicone and the new materials are silicone-based? 60 years ago didn't work. What's the new expectations with these new materials?
So there are certain limits what you can do yourself. We have started very enthusiastically with the support of US institutions, leading polymer scientists to develop our own polymer until we realized this is just 3 numbers too big for a university in a middle-income country. But you have giants like DSM who have spent the last 40, 50 years since Nina Brown on developing very, very smart materials. And you do have smart materials. For instance, Foldax is a company which started making surgical polymer valves. They are by now in about 100 patients, rheumatic patients in India, with excellent up to 2-year results. So Nina Brown valves, Pellethen stuff, that all degenerated very, very rapidly. You have tests, as you know better than me, accelerated tests for aging and for degradation. They are probably not the final point on the asymptotic curve to true perfect materials, but I think they get us far, far further than any of the bioprosthetic material today.
Dr. Zilla, thank you very much for sharing your great insights with us today. And thank you all for being here. Thank you again to Research Services for making this possible. And last but not least, thank you to the South African High Delegation and High Commission for being here to support this collaboration between our institute and the reality in South Africa and other countries that are low to middle income. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you still go there? Not so much. I haven't gone for 25 years. Kofi was very involved. Yeah.